Hi, and welcome back to Short Story Focus. Thanks for stopping by. Today we're going to be looking at this novella, and the title of the novella is Hurled Headlong Flaming, or The Bishop's Tale. And this is a sword and sorcery story written by Matt Holder. And this is put out newly by Spiral Tower Press. And Spiral Tower Press is put together by Jason Ray Carney, who is a professor who also has a great affection for sword and sorcery and stories of this type. And he has put together several magazines over the years. And before this, his latest one was Whetstone, which was a more or less an amateur level sword and sorcery magazine for people maybe getting published for the first time. It was a great venue for them to get attention, but it has also had a high quality and good standards. So, if you got published in Whetstone, you were getting your career off to a good start. Thus far, there are about 8 editions of it. So I hope they continue to do more because it's loaded with good stories. Now, with Hurled Headlong Flaming, or The Bishop's Tale, we have the beginning of a Spiral Tower Press imprint that's going to be known as Keen Blades. And these are going to be novella-length stories. So this is about, 100 pages. And this, I feel, the novella length like this is really just fantastic for science fiction stories and for sword and sorcery stories, especially. If you go back to the beginning of sword and sorcery, this was the kind of stuff that they were doing. The stories just lend themselves well to that level of expression and development. So I just feel like this is a home run, and I'm actually really excited about it. And that's why I wanted to do a review about it and maybe just kind of hope to raise awareness. One of the things that we can do in talking about this story is just take a look at the blurb first on the back, because it is revealing. So it says here that Hurled Headlong Flaming, The Bishop's Tale is a sword and sorcery novella by Matt Holder that follows a priest on a perilous quest to a hellish underworld to retrieve an ancient manuscript. He believes he can help prevent the apocalypse by finding this manuscript. Drawing from influences like Dante, Milton, and Lovecraftian horror, this bizarre tale sees the bishop descend through a hidden city, forced to engage in infernal dialogues and navigate labyrinthine streets while pursued by demonic creatures. And there definitely is all of that in the story, and it is very well done. Now it goes on to say here, grappling with questions of faith, truth, and the brutality of the Crusades, the bishop's harrowing journey examines the violence that often accompanies meaning-making in a world that resists interpretation. Furthermore, it says, this first entry in the Keen Blades series from Spiral Tower Press aims to expand the boundaries of what sword and sorcery can be. And Jake Kelly is the artist here for the cover. So in the introduction to Keen Blades, one of the things that Jason Ray Carney is pointing out is that sword and sorcery is seeing a resurgence. And so this I'm just going to pull an excerpt from the introduction in regards to that. And it says, one outcome of such a renaissance is the potential for artistic experimentation. There is a ferment that occurs when many people are writing and reading together. I love the sound of that. However, one risk is that the fiction becomes formulaic, offering more of the same. So that is definitely something that we don't want to happen to sword and sorcery, right? If you look at the old sword and sorcery from Howard, and then when it resurged again in the 60s, there might have been some of the formula there. It is with good cause that be brought up. Many fans of sword and sorcery like some of that predictability. They like some of that formula. I do like to sit down and read a predictable sword and sorcery story. I like something that is formulaic. I like something that kind of cleaves to all of the notions that one has about sword and sorcery as a genre. But, at other times, I certainly get excited about something like this, which is something that takes the definition of sword and sorcery and applies what I would call definition drift. Just a slight, maybe moving beyond the edges of what is the normal definition of the elements that an editor might look for when choosing stories for the sword and sorcery genre. One of the things about this is this story is that it definitely pushes the boundaries of the genre just a little bit, and I feel like it pushes it definitely in a good direction, because what we have here in the Bishop is a character who can use a sword when he has to, but is definitely a learned man. He doesn't consider himself a swordsman by any measure, but he has had to use weapons because he's involved in the Crusades. So as much as he's a man of God and a man of the cloth and peace and whatnot, he is also somebody who can defend himself. This was an interesting thing, and that is mentioned here in the introduction, and it's something I had never heard of. In further talking here in the intro, Editor Carney says, "For this first entry in Keen Blades, we offer Hurled Headlong Flaming, the Bishop's Tale. This bizarre story engages with the psychocartographic tradition of medieval allegory, drawing on Dante, Milton, and metal music for its aesthetic." And it goes on to say a few other things. And I found that fascinating. That is not something I'd ever encountered before. And I hope that in hearing that, that makes you think this might be a story that you'd like to look into too. Just as a quick aside, let's take just a real brief look here at Flame and Crimson by Brian Murphy. And this is a history of sword and sorcery. Now, if you can easily find Brian Murphy on YouTube. He is also a regular guest on the Rogues in the House podcast. Rogues in the House is an excellent podcast, and I really recommend it. You can also find their Facebook page. They're very nice gentlemen. They are accessible and friendly and really, really good at what they do. It's just one of the most enjoyable podcasts on any subject that I've listened to, and I've listened to a lot of them, and I just kind of like their friendly, open approach. These are the kind of guys that are inviting people into the world of sword and sorcery while they're talking about it with expertise. And Brian Murphy is a regular guest on there, but I also found him on a few YouTube videos where he was being interviewed, and I must say he's just an impressive interview. It's good stuff. I recommend seeking him out. Now, in Chapter 1, which is called What is Sword and Sorcery, of this great book, David C. Smith, in his introduction to Swords and Steel, is mentioned here. So I'll just read this quote. "We can give you clues what it is and what it is not. It is not high fantasy. High fantasy dresses up life and offers comfort. It is romantic. Our fiction is dark, often very dark. In the same way that unsettling dreams are never far from nightmares and not at all comforting." So that is an aspect also of sword and sorcery, and I felt like this story definitely epitomizes that in the absolutely best way. Within the story, we have the adventure of the Bishop. Now, I don't want to give too much of this away, and how often have I leaned in a camera on reviews and said that and then gone ahead and done it anyway? Well, I'm not doing it in this one. There are no spoilers in this review. However, I will talk a little bit about the beginning to just try and set up and whet your appetite. In the beginning of the story, the Bishop, we learn, has summoned a man who he wants to speak to. And while the authorities are holding that man, they torture him. And when the Bishop finally finds the man to ask him one question, he finds that they have really done this guy wrong, and he is really messed up. And the Bishop is somewhat repulsed by that, and some people around him pay for that, via their own actions. Of course, the Bishop is not a cruel man, and in seeing how this man was treated, he's very upset and feels accountable. But he has that question to ask, and he asks it. And what we learn is that the Bishop is looking for the man who can point him towards a library. He's looking for a specific journal or work within that library. And to get to that library, he will have to venture down into an underworld of unfathomable evil and strife and combat and danger, and also a humongous test of will and wit and guile, as well as his own learned profession of, being a man of the cloth, being stretched to its utmost limits when it's challenged by these Lovecraftian eldritch demons and entities who wish to call him out, see if they can find a limit to his ability to express himself in his faith and in his beliefs. And it really is fascinating the way that it all plays out in the story. And I'm reluctant to go into too much detail because this is a fresh novel. It was just written, and a lot of people are still hoping to read it. So, my review is so early that I want to be very cautious about giving away too much. So as far as that goes, that's all I'd like to say about it. And I might add, hopefully without giving away too much, that the relation to the story to Dante is really well done. If you've read Dante, you'll recognize them immediately, and it's pretty cool, and it's really well done, and it's just as harrowing and disturbing in this story as it is in Dante. So you have that enjoyable moment in the story to look forward to. When you think about how the goal of this Keen Blades project is maybe to push the definition of sword and sorcery beyond itself, maybe just a little bit, or in this case a lot, because you have this intellectual protagonist who's a learned man, and really is a man who's willing to stop and talk about things and to discuss things philosophically and religiously, but is also fully capable of taking up the sword and kicking ass when he needs to. It's a really wonderful blend that way. What we have is a writer who understands the forms of sword and sorcery. He understands the definitions, varied though they are, and he is also able to expertly transcend them. When you read this, you will definitely see that transcendence, and it especially comes home in the snake kind of eating itself nature of the story. It's really quite an experience, and well worth the read. The trials and the journey of the bishop within this story, I feel, are compelling. They are well informed for both sword and sorcery, but also from a literary and a historical standpoint. It's a fascinating mix, and it is interesting to see that this could be part of the future of the sword and sorcery genre. Guys like Matt Holder and Jason Ray Carney are looking to take this old art form that's been around for a long time and been through a lot of changes, most of them really good changes, and continue to move this art form that we call sword and sorcery towards this ever more expansive approach that allows more and more of the dynamic of human understanding to come into it, while not for 1 minute losing that raw, frenetic power and energy that Robert E. Howard originally brought to the art form. What we have here is a character who solves his problem some of the way with a sword and some of the way with his wit and his guile. And maybe in the modern age, it's important to understand the value of being able to be a man or a person of action, also someone who, in the course of that is also well thought out and well considered. Hurled Headlong and Flaming, or The Bishop's Tale, written by Matt Holder, published by Spiral Tower Press. You can find it on Amazon. I think it was about $8, and highly recommended.